Alright, welcome back everyone. I know it's been a while since I've been doing these videos, but I want to get back into it. So, first of all, before I encounter in on this is a really weird subject and really strange situation. But a while back, I got into a conversation with a white nationalist. It's actually somebody that I've known for quite some time. And I knew that he was conservative, more on the conservative side of things, but I didn't realize that he would go so far down as to be a white nationalist. But I was curious and I had to ask some questions. First of all, let me say that I do not agree with his stance. I do not agree with his philosophy. I don't agree with his opinion. But we did talk about things like civilized adults, because while I may not agree with his opinion and I find it kind of distasteful and gross, I know that there's nothing I can do to change it, and that doesn't take away from the way that he interacts with me on a person-to-person basis. Alright, so the white nationalist narrative is basically that what he believes is that the races cannot coexist together. It's not possible. To which I disagreed with, and I said, well, I think they can. And he said, well, what's all the racial disparity about? And I said, well, I think somebody has been teaching these people some really, really bad ideologies. For instance, white patriarchal and capitalistic imperialism nonsense. And I would love to go into a long spiel about capitalism and a free market society and economic depression and the less ideas on getting out and the right's ideas of getting out. And when I say left and right, I'm talking about the Democratic, more liberal, left-leaning side versus the conservative, Republican, right-leaning side in American politics. Not left meaning communism and right meaning fascist. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm sticking to more, I guess, definitions you would have used back in the 90s when I say that. But, okay. So I was making the proclamation that this was something that was being taught to people, that they are treated differently in society. And a lot of what I see as being treated differently is really just how, the majority of it is poor people are treated like shit in society. That's just the run of it. And I've lived in poverty my whole life, and I've grown accustomed and used to it. It's nothing. It's like, yeah, whatever, fuck you. But it's also like, it's really hard to get out of poverty if you're born into it in the United States. I think they even conducted a survey or census or something like that, so that it's actually easier to get out of poverty in the United Kingdom than it is in the United States if you're born into poverty. But that's going into economics. So we're talking about this white nationalists' crazy idea. I said, I think that, the races can and they do get along with each other just fine. I've seen it happen in my lifetime. Like, basically, the 90s and the early 2000s was a prime example of that, is that everybody kind of made fun of each other with hyperbolic, what's the word I'm looking for, stereotypes, to joke around about each other. I mean, white people joked about themselves, black people joked about them. Like, just basically everybody was just talking about these hyperbolic stereotypes. And they're funny because we all know somebody that's kind of like that. But I mean, like, it wasn't any big thing. I mean, it's just nobody was at each other's throats. I mean, like, if anyone ever did come out and say that they were racist, I think that person would be instantaneously ostracized because it just wasn't something that was tolerated. You make jokes, but if you're actually like legitimately you think that way, then like you're ostracized. Anyway, I asked him though this really simple question. If he were to have his way, that if the United States became absolutely Caucasian white because you want only a white culture because the cultures clash. By the way, ethnicity and race is different than culture. It's actually a plethora of different cultures that you can attribute to the white race, as well as a plethora of cultures attributed to the black race. I'm really sick and tired of this whole, like, let's look at people based on the color of their skin instead of just viewing them as people, because honestly, that's just what we all are. We're just all fucking people. So yeah, absolutely, we can coexist in the same nation together, and we are a nation of fucking immigrants. So I don't see what the problem is, but he's absolutely convinced that this racial disparity will never end because the races just can't learn to live amongst each other, which I think is a very deplorable, despicable view of the world, and I think it's shameful whatever brought him to think that way. I said, no, I think that a lot of these people are getting bad education. And when I look at the education system, at least in the United States, it's just it's a train wreck. It's fucking terrible. So I asked this question, though. I said, so in your little world that you've created, is there any room for countercultures and subcultures? To which I had to distinguish the difference between the two. And, I talked about the gay culture is a subculture. And it's a subculture because it's a mini culture that is replicant of the mainstream culture. Whatever's popular in the mainstream culture, the gay culture will reflect that. And then counterculture is counter to the mainstream. It's basically polarity. When I think counterculture, I think of the beatniks, I think of the hippies, I think of punks and goths. And the idea behind it is something along the lines of, that goes along with the philosophy of Timothy Leary, where it's like, we don't really want to be freaked out by the normal man, nor do we want to be normally formalized by the normal man. What we want to do is out-freak the normal man. So basically, if you take a counterculture like the goth culture, or the punk culture, which is solely there specifically to be, well, goth is more obscene in a dark way, punk is more obscene in a fuck you type way. So they're they represent a polarity to the mainstream. They are counter to the mainstream, but they would not be able to exist without the mainstream culture. I put it to him like this. I said, the kind of the purpose behind goth is to be freaky and weird and bizarre and dark. And so if mainstream culture picked that up and everything became gothic, well then the goth community would basically have to try extra hard to be extra different, because they would no longer be the freaky, weird, dark ones anymore, because that would be adopted by mainstream culture. And why I say gay culture is a subculture is because it would mimic that. That would then become the popularized thing to do, and they would indoctrinate it into their own subculture. But that, to me, that is the difference between subculture and counterculture. And he asked if the counterculture's goal was to overthrow the mainstream, and I said no, because if the counterculture overthrew the mainstream, we would have lost our cause. We would no longer be relatively different. We would be the same as everyone else, and that's not what you want. You want to deliberately be different. And he couldn't answer that question. And I found that kind of a philosophical point of interest. That something as simple as breaking down things into subculture, subcategories, and countercategories is that if its attempt is not to overthrow the mainstream, because ultimately what he's boiling down to with his white nationalist identity politics is basically boils down to culture, that he wants a white culture, and that's the only way a society can exist. So then I say, well, what about subcultures and countercultures? He didn't have the answer to it. And to me, that's not only indicative of having a one-track mind, or a mind that is not capable of free thinking, of somebody who is just following the leader. Herd mentality, pack mentality. Not a free thinker, if you will. Because he wasn't prepared for that kind of question. And I think if you're going to fully endorse something like that, you should probably have an answer, like be able to understand the philosophy of your cause, to be able to say yes or no, and here's the reasons why or why not. But he wasn't. He wasn't able to do that. And therefore, I think that it's a straw man all the way through at that point to me, that it's fundamentally flawed. You cannot say that white people have only one culture. You can't say that black people only have one culture. And we have many, many, many cultures that do exist within the United States, and in places like Australia, and in places like England. But the thing that he brought up was that the cultures that we're moving in did not become the dominant culture. But then you have people like me that make up our own culture. And I don't think culture is the problem. I don't think anybody has any problem with people exercising their right to a culture that they subscribe to. I think the moment that identity politics comes into place is when culture becomes a relative issue. Because let's say that you identify with, let's say, Caribbean island cultures, but let's say that you don't come from the Caribbean islands, but you identify with that culture. You like the way that they grieve over the loss, or the way that they deal with death. You like their ceremonies. You like their religious philosophy. You like the wardrobes they wear. You just generally like the lifestyle culture of certain tribes that come from the Caribbean islands. Would I say that you have to be from the Caribbean islands to respect, admire, adore, and take on that culture and be a part of it as your own? No, I would say absolutely not. I think that that's a personal choice and preference. Just the same as I don't think that you can appropriate a culture. I don't think that this is possible. I think if you like a culture and you want to be a part of that culture and you feel akin to that culture, you can be a part of it. Being a part of Native American culture is different than saying I am a Native American. Those are two totally different statements. Being a part of Native American culture and learning how to build teepees and live in the wild and hunt like they did and believe the things that they did, and admitting to yourself that you are not a Native American but you live in the Native American culture, I don't see anything wrong with that. By the way, I'm like 1/8 Native American, so I think I have the rights to make that claim. So I find this white nationalist argument interesting. I did boil down, and I did kind of talk to him about where he thinks I stand politically, because I think this is an interesting... We always try to fit people in these little cubby holes. And at first he was saying that I was conservative, and then it went to libertarian, then it was a classical liberal, and then eventually he came down to the point of saying, well, I guess they just don't really have a cubbyhole for you to fit in. Bravo. I love that. I like that I don't fit into a cubbyhole nowadays, because it seems like the cubbyholes are filled with bullshit. On the left you have communists, on the right you have fascists. Fuck that. By classical definitions, I am a liberal, and here's the reasons why. I am for egalitarianism. I'm a humanitarian. I have a bleeding heart. I am ultimately for the individual rights, liberties, and freedoms that an individual can express. I am for giving more rights, liberties, and freedoms, generally. I am anti-authoritarian. So I'm anti-communism, I'm anti-fascism, I'm anti-dictatorship. I am not for anarchy, however, although I am anti-authoritarian. I like to live in kind of a disruptive way. Is like, yes, I do break rules because I am anti-authoritarian. I don't like being told what to do, but I don't think anarchy works very well. I think if we lived in an anarchy society, you would basically see people break off into little tribes and groups of their own. And they'd form their own hierarchies. Why? Because we're a pack animal. We can't help it. So I think that a liberal democracy is the best way to go. It seems to be the most effective way to live in a government system in which there are rules that apply. And I do believe that things like rape and murder and molestation and yada yada, theft, that's somebody imposing their will upon another person against their own will. And that's authoritative. And that's something I'm against. And that's where the law can come in and stop those people from doing it. Hopefully that's what our laws are designed to do. Ultimately, in the end, that desire for freedoms and rights and liberties makes me a liberal. And I think the thing that people hate about liberal and what makes them start going socialism is that with freedom comes a lot of responsibility, which means, for instance, you have the right, the liberty, and the freedom to get drunk, to drink alcohol. However, you are responsible for your actions. Meaning, if you make a stupid decision and it gets somebody hurt, you can't come out and say, well, it wasn't my fault, it was the alcohol. You have to take responsibility for drinking the alcohol and own up. You might have committed involuntary manslaughter, and that sucks, but you're responsible for your actions. Accountability, responsibility. But I'm all about freedom. But you have to own up to what it is what you do. This is a philosophy that I live by. For one, if you're ashamed of what you're doing, you probably shouldn't be doing it. And two, live by the philosophy that you can stand behind what it is that you're doing. If you can't stand behind it, you shouldn't be doing it. In other words, love what you do and do what you love. So, that being said, I just thought it was interesting. I wish I could have captured the conversation that I had with the white nationalist and recorded it. I didn't know it was going to go down such an interesting conversational path. I didn't know it was going to go there, but it did. And so now I can relay the message on to you that is a white nationalist narrative, that they believe that different races, because of their cultural backgrounds, inherently cannot get along. And unfortunately, that is the narrative of both sides of the communists and the fascists, which is not a philosophy I believe in at all. I think that would be highly restrictive of personal freedoms. Let's say you fall in love with somebody of a different ethnicity and you want to fuck the hell out of them and have babies with them. You wouldn't be able to do that under either philosophy of communism or fascism. That's restricting freedoms. Can't get behind it. Not only that, I think it's just flawed in and of itself to think that if somebody is a different color than you, then they're just inherently different in the way that they think, which is completely absurd and obnoxious that anyone would still even think that. There's not a single characteristic trait that any one race has that is different to anyone else. Not a single one. It's actually, if you look at it, there are universal languages that are understood. Being mad, being in love, infatuation, attraction, sadness. These are universal traits throughout any culture that even through language barriers we can still recognize. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. And if there is anyone out there that can answer the question how the white nationalists would deal with subcultures and countercultures. Because another thing I don't like about the white nationalist narrative is, as a homosexual, I don't want to go back to homosexuals having to be in the closet and they be a social pariah, because that did a huge amount of damage to anyone that was homosexual. And that wasn't that long ago. That was like back in the 1950s. So I don't want to go back to that. So I'd be really curious as to know what the white nationalist philosophy or ideology or whatever it is, how they feel about subcultures and countercultures. I may not subscribe to their beliefs, but I'm curious as to what their beliefs are. Anyway, let me know what you think. Like, share, subscribe, comment, hit the bell button on any channel you are subscribed to. Support YouTube content creators. There's a lot of them out there that are whining and crying and bitching about the ad boycott. It's like none of them do this because they want to do it, because they literally get joy out of interacting with their audience and spreading information and putting their ideas and opinions out there to be discussed. They're doing it because, well, they just want to get paid to... And I'm not going to lie, doing YouTube videos is hard. The editing does take a long time. But come on. It's getting really ridiculous. The sob stories that I've been hearing and the YouTube drama sagas that are going on. Although I do think it's kind of interesting to get to know some of the content creators on a personal basis and have kind of a personal relationship with their audience. That I'm totally in favor of. But I'm tired of hearing YouTubers cry about not getting paid because they make YouTube videos. That's part of the reason also why I've not been uploading as much, is my schedule has gotten me so worn out. And I did get way far behind working on those Tomb Raider videos. Those are unbelievably hard to make. One of those videos took 2 days just to export the video. That's crazy. But anyway, so like, share, subscribe, comment, hit the bell button, support the YouTube content creators. You don't have to give them money, but just letting them know that you watch their channel and you appreciate what they do. That's all it takes, at least for me. And with that, I'm out.